Now, debate is raging since Tourism Minister published an opinion piece that suggests a link between poverty among Africans and the provisions of the Constitution. Minister Lindiwe Sisulu, shooting from the hip, refers to the Constitution as merely a painkiller that fails to address the shortcomings in the creation of wealth and equality, particularly for black people in this country. Joining us now to discuss how we should understand the Constitution versus the role of government is former Constitutional Court Justice Zak Yacoob. Justice Yacoob, good to have you with us tonight here on In Focus. The Tourism Minister writes, as she closes her article, we have a neoliberal constitution with foreign inspiration. And where is the African value system of this constitution and the rule of law? Is the African value system incorporated in our constitution?
Not in so many words, but I would suggest that the values in our constitution are exactly the same as African values. They are not liberal values. They are very far from liberal. Our constitution is transformative in nature. But the problem is that the Constitution does not achieve change by itself. The Constitution is a piece of paper, it's a past legislation, and unless people implement it, nothing will happen. So the problem really is that the government has not implemented the Constitution. And on my understanding of Africa and African culture, Ubuntu is about equality, dignity, freedom, respect. Respect for people with disability, complete non-racialism, complete non-sexism. These are not Western values. They are our values. We have crafted them. And over and above that, we have, it's the first constitution in the world which has social economic rights included in them, which is the right to housing, the right to social welfare, the right to education, and a whole range of other rights. Now again, it's not the Constitution that can achieve it, it's the government that has to implement the Constitution, and the government in the last 27 years just hasn't done so.
Yeah.
And finally, our Constitution has the right to property, Section 25, which has in it an expropriation provision, which says that compensation payable for expropriation must be just and equitable compensation, balancing the interests of all people involved, and taking into account a number of factors. And the just and equitable compensation is supposed to take into account factors like the history of the acquisition, when and how the property was acquired, market value as one of the factors, what the people are doing with the property, what was the state's contribution to the property, and so on. So that properly worked out, just an equitable compensation could well have amounted to 100 rand or something, which would have been easy for the government to pay. Our system was crafted on the basis that the government will charge more taxes, expropriate property from those who have it, and pass it on to those who do not. And the trouble is that the government did not do that.
Yeah.
Our expropriation law, which existed before 1994, provided for market value. Our Constitution specifically provided that this must be changed to just and equitable compensation.
Yeah.
And you know what? Nobody will believe me. Our law is still the same as the apartheid law, which provides for market value compensation.
Now,
and that is part of the problem. So there's been too much corruption in the government.
Yeah.
There's been too much stealing in the government. They have not been doing what the Constitution requires of them. And now it becomes convenient to blame the Constitution. How would you say, anything?
Sorry, Justice.
Yes,
if I can come there, I'm saying, would you say, as you're putting it, politicians are the ones who are failing, who are supposed to be called lawgivers or lawmakers, at least in Parliament, right? The minister suggests that during colonialism and apartheid, right, the lawmakers of the time were purposeful. They had a simple agenda: take, colonize, defend, for their own benefit. It was about getting power, getting economic power, getting political power, getting military power, and getting social power. However, the language of our constitution right now does very little to reverse and change that kind of arrangement.
No, I think it does. It does a great deal to change. But the problem is that, in a sense, our government has been like colonialism. They've not tried to put into practice the anti-colonial constitution. What they've done is, like colonizers, they've just taken for themselves through their corrupt practices and so on. Take for yourself, don't give to anybody. So I think the Congress has learned a great deal from colonialism and the way in which it does things.
Yeah. Words like economic justice, economic restoration, economic reparation, are these concepts that are articulated in our Constitution, or at least the Constitution imagines that we would need to get to this point?
No, it's said in a particular way. That Section 26 of the Constitution provides, for example, that the state will take reasonable legislative and other measures to ensure, within available resources, equitable access to housing. Section 27 provides for equitable access to health care and social services and social security. Section 29 provides for education. But you think the government has done any of these things? It hasn't. So if it had developed education properly, socio-economic rights properly, the right to education properly, and the government didn't steal, we would have had a lot more money and a lot more could have been done. You see, it may be that different people would have framed the Constitution differently, depending on how they felt about it. But if you look at this Constitution, the verbiage, I didn't know that equality, dignity, human dignity, looking after people with disability, ensuring that people get housing, ensuring that people get social security, that's not Western. There is no Western country which provides for the right to housing. I'll tell you that. There is no Western constitution which provides for the right to fair labor practice. There is no Western constitution which provides for just and equitable compensation. So it is very different from a Western constitution, and there is no Western constitution which provides for genuine affirmative action in ensuring that people who are affected by past inequality benefit from future services. So ours is not a Western document. It's written in English, certainly. It's been translated into many languages. But those who say that the Constitution is just a new document, an old Western-style document, don't know what they're talking about. Of course, it doesn't show off in the sense of demonstrating the kind of language that modern African people would see. But that is not the point. The point is, you look at the Constitution, see what it means, and see whether it has been properly implemented.
Right.
And nothing. Our education provisions have not been complied with at all either.
Conversation around the Constitution, of course, sparked by that published article that made rounds during the weekend, coming from the Minister of Tourism, articulating, in essence, that the sea of poverty that many black South Africans are swimming in is as a result of the limited work that this Constitution does for the people of this country. Justice Zaki Yakub, reflecting on that, apartheid activist and former Constitutional Court judge. Justice Yakub, there is a special criticism, shall I say, that this article puts for the higher echelons of our judicial system, saying we have judges with a colonized mentality sitting in the higher echelons of our judicial system, with a mindset of the dispossessed, rather the mindset of those who dispossessed their ancestors. They lack confidence in their rulings, for example, to address things like the Native Land Act of 1913. How would you respond to that?
That is absolutely untrue. It is disrespect to the wonderful African judges who we've had in our country, brilliant people. Chief Justice Pius Langa, Chief Justice Sandile Ngobo, Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. We have a whole range, Justice Yvonne Makoro, Judge Madala. We have a whole range of jurors who were well and truly African. The Constitutional Court consists mainly of African people. Our judges of our country are also mainly African. It is true that some of them, African or whoever, have adopted somewhat more conservative values. But that depends on something else. If you are born a conservative person, if you got out of that side of the bed, it's hard to change those habits, colonialism or otherwise. Because remember that there are conservative traditionalists in Africa as well. The reputation in African countries for gender equality is very, very poor indeed. The absence of patriarchy in Africa is a misnomer. So unless somebody is saying that we must now start oppressing women and so on like people they did in the olden days, I don't know what this argument actually means, because many African traditions were good and wonderful. Many traditions everywhere were good and wonderful. But there are certain traditions, like the way in which women were treated in most African societies, is not a good thing at all. And therefore, I speak as an African person. Although I was born an Indian, I think I qualify as an African in South Africa to say that we as African people have many, many wonderful values, but we must not believe that as African people, everything we practice is absolutely spot on right. Because cultures change, things change, people learn from each other. And you will remember, I think, that your parents' values, when you were a young boy, in relation to children even, were very different in those days to parents' values today. Things have changed and things change everywhere. And we've changed much more than South Africa. We are very much a racist and sexist society still. But so is America, so is England, so is India.
Yeah.
But we've made a great deal of advances, and we can make a lot more. And I want to say one more thing.
Yes.
That the Constitution imposes a duty, I think, on governments to do what they have to do to implement the Constitution. It imposes the duty on all of us to do all we can to make sure that we all become non-racist and non-sexist, that we all push in the lines of honesty all over the place, that we ourselves become non-corrupt. It is not the Constitution that has made our government as corrupt as it has been for the last 20-odd years. It is anti-Constitution. Our Constitution provides for honesty. Interestingly, by the way, the African National Congress Constitution provides for honesty too. I was reading it the other day, and it is supposed to be one of its prime values. And I'm sure many people will find that interesting. And then the way in which our Constitution expected change was incrementally, because we have fair labor practices with black trade unions empowered to bargain for their rights. And you don't have these black trade unions anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, which are as strong as ours are.
Yeah.
And of course, you'll find that even conservative African people say our trade unions have got too much power. Right. I'm sure you've heard them say that.
Yeah.
But we do have that. We empower our trade unions to do their job properly. And the idea there is that at that level, if workers get paid properly for what they do, they get paid more and more money, and they're given the right to bargain for their extra pay, they'll be much better off than succumbing to their employers. So if you have that, you have the housing rights, you have the right to social security, you have the property provisions, and the equality provisions of our Constitution, and the dignity provisions, if the Constitution is implemented by government.
Right.
And if everybody disagrees with incremental change, but I'm telling you this, that if in the last 27 years we have changed 5% every year, improved the conditions of our people by 5% every year, we would have been more than there by now.
Justice Yaqub, finally, as we wrap up, is there a need to overhaul the justice system so that it begins to work for Africans on the question of land and reverse the disastrous effects of the 1913 Natives Land Act?
The way to reverse the disastrous effects of the Native Land Act is not to change the judiciary, but to ensure that the government gives effect to our constitutional provision, expropriates property from rich people at a just and equitable value, and gives it to poor people. And as I said, that is how African people have got their property. As I said earlier, if the government had charged the taxpayers a bit more tax, had stopped stealing, and our property position has improved by 5% every year, we'd have been much better off. And as people got more and more property, more and more people got their own property, so they would have been able to participate in the economy a little more. As the labor rights increased, they'd have been able to participate in the economy better, and they'd have been much more meaningful part of our economy. So I think that our Constitution does indeed provide it, and just changing the judiciary and calling it something else and calling the values something else doesn't really help us. Let's get real, and let's talk about the fact that we want workers to have more money in their pockets. We want poor people to have houses. We want to ensure that property is taken from the rich and given to the poor on a just and equitable basis. And even if we start now improving at 5% a year, we'll be at a wonderful position in 20 years' time. I don't believe that we have reached the stage in our country where we've got to destroy everything by destructive revolution. I did believe that when I was a young man. I don't believe that anymore. I think that we can get more by just incrementally changing things and having an honest government.
Justice Yaqub, appreciate your time and your input tonight here on the show. That is former Constitutional Court Justice Zack Yaqub.